Last July carried that particular Arkansas heat that sits on the skin even after sundown, the kind that makes windows stay cracked open long into the night. My parents had finally taken a week off for themselves, leaving the farm in the hands of us kids, me, Howard, 25, and already restless with the idea of inheriting this land, and my sisters Crystal and Morgan. The farm isn't much. Not commercial, not sprawling, just rows of corn and beans wrapped by empty roads. But isolation has a way of breathing too loudly once the sun drops. It was our job to tend the animals, watch the crops, and hold down the old house while the real adults were gone. None of us really wanted this life, least of all me, but it wasn't supposed to be dangerous. The night started easy. Crystal sat buried in her summer courses upstairs, tapping away on her laptop. Morgan and I half watched a dumb sitcom in the living room, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, trying to forget we were surrounded by miles of nothing. Then the dogs erupted. Both of them, outside in the back, going feral at something they'd scented. Their barking was sharp enough to shake glass. I stepped out onto the porch, gunless but annoyed, the way you get with animals that can't be reasoned with. They weren't barking at the sky or the barn. They were locked onto the cornfield, snouts pointed, bodies rigid. Then came the sound that chilled me. Whistling. Not bird call, not wind, but a human whistle, rising clean above the rows. I felt a tremor in my hands. Trespassers weren't unheard of. People come to steal feed or produce sometimes, but the whistle was deliberate. I turned, marched back inside, and grabbed one of Dad's rifles. My sisters were wide-eyed when I told them someone was out there. Morgan blurted that it was insane to go into the field, and Crystal reminded me that the dark swallows people hole out here. They were right. The thought of walking between those stalks with someone hiding just beyond the next row made my gut clench. So instead I did the only thing that felt powerful. I stepped outside, aimed at the stars, and fired a shot. The crack of it rolled over the land, echoing until even the dogs went still. I shouted into the black, "Get off our land!" My own voice startled me, swollen with bravado. Inside, my sisters laughed nervously, but our laughter was short. The dogs went off again, more frantic, more desperate. When I stormed back out, adrenaline pumping, I saw him. A man, no more than 20 feet away, standing just at the edge where the yard surrendered to corn. The porch light caught his outline. Average build, hands loose at his sides, watching. When I yelled, he broke, sprinting into the stalks like he belonged to the field. I fired another warning shot, but the corn swallowed him whole. My throat tightened with the decision I had to make: chase or retreat. The answer was clear. I unclipped the dogs, pulled them inside, and locked the door. My sisters' faces were pale mirrors of my own fear. We called Dad. His voice, over the line, was firm but tired. "Be the man of the house. Protect your sisters. If he comes back, fire again." The weight of his words pressed on me long after we hung up. We tried to act normal, each of us retreating to our rooms. Crystal and Morgan slept with the dogs at their feet. I laid on my bed, rifle within reach, laptop movie playing like a lullaby I wasn't buying. The night was heavy, pressing. Then came the whistle. High, slow, cutting through the summer air. I froze, then crawled to the window. There he was, walking leisurely across the yard, whistling like a man on a stroll. My stomach turned to stone. He stopped directly below my window and, as if sensing me, tilted his head upward. Though I couldn't make out details, I knew he was smiling. I snatched the rifle, swung it out the window, and fired into the grass close, intentionally missing. The whistle ended mid-note. He jerked, startled, then bolted into the dark, vanishing toward the road. I stayed at the window for what felt like hours, rifle steady, waiting for a return that never came. At last, I told my sisters. They clutched their dogs and whispered, "Thanks," voices trembling but grateful that I'd scared him off. None of us slept well. Every floor creak sounded like footsteps, every gust of wind like a whistle returning. Morning brought sunlight that made the previous night feel like a fever dream, but unease clung to us like sweat. Over breakfast we speculated. Teenagers playing horror games, some drifter passing through, or worse. The field held no clear footprints, only the flattened rows where deer could have bedded down. The only evidence that anything had happened at all was our own memory of the man's whistle, his head tilting up toward my window. We didn't bother calling the police. Out here, response times stretch long, and without proof it would just be another farm story laughed off as paranoia. Dad's return a few days later brought stern words and new locks, and he talked about cameras, motion lights, stronger fences. But in the end, even he couldn't explain why someone would taunt a family with whistles in the dark. The truth that unsettled me most wasn't his intent, but his calm. Whoever he was, he hadn't rushed, hadn't stumbled. He'd walked with purpose, as if he knew the property, as if our fear was part of a script he'd written. When his whistle cut through the night, it wasn't clumsy or offbeat. It was clear, practiced, mocking. Even now, sometimes when the wind tunnels through the corn just right, I swear I hear it again, faint and deliberate, echoing that one July night. And each time I remember the way he stood beneath my window, head tilted, waiting for me to see him. My name's Nick, a freshman at Cortland University, now living in a part of town that doesn't exactly make you feel safe after dark. A breakup had left the edges of my life frayed, so I dove back into dating apps like a man who's suddenly allergic to being alone. That's where I found Claire, blonde, put together, profile full of books and movie posters, and a smart little joke in her bio that made my chest loosen the first time I read it. When she said she liked the same obscure authors I did, I thought maybe this one would be different. We messaged for a week, the kind of flirt that slides into easy honesty, and then she suggested a movie. She'd pick me up, she said, from a corner near campus. We agreed on 9. I waited on a quiet block wrapped in early fall silence, street lamps casting low, watercolor pools of light. The corner wasn't far from dorms, but far enough to be private, the moment I liked about it. I shared my location like you do when you don't want strangers to have excuses, and when a car came down the street, I assumed it was Claire. It slowed, parked, and the window rolled down. An old man leaned out of the driver's seat, sun-lined face and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hi," he said. "You must be Nick. I'm Claire's father. Hop in. I'll drive you to her." My skin flattened in a dozen places at once. He looked too old to be her dad, or at least too old to be believable. He smelled faintly of oil and stale cigarettes when he opened the door. My gut tightened with that old animal warning you get when you look at someone and something in them is wrong for you. I don't brag about instincts, but I have them. I told him in a steady voice I didn't feel that Claire hadn't mentioned a ride. He said he'd wanted to meet the person his daughter was seeing. It sounded rehearsed, like a line from a movie. I started to walk away. He called after me with an almost teasing "hey, hey," as though surprised I'd refused such a polite offer. His car rattled. He drove off. I breathed the tiny air of relief you get when a shadow moves away. I kept walking down the block toward campus, my sneakers against pavement, my phone in my palm like a talisman. I told myself to relax. College towns are full of odd encounters. You play them off like they're part of the scenery. At the next corner, the car sat parked in the gloom with its lights off. My stomach did a small, betrayed flip. I tried to look through the tinted window, but the glass ate the details. Claire texted within minutes. "Why didn't you get in my dad's car?" I ignored it and kept walking, forcing a nonchalance I didn't feel. When I picked up my pace, the sound of my own breath grew louder than it had any right to. I heard a faint scrape of boot nudging glass, a small break of something underfoot. I ducked behind a delivery van to listen. Footsteps thumped down the block, slow and a little too steady for casual walking. That's when I realized I was still sharing my location with whoever had Claire's profile. I'd left it on while we talked, an overshare that felt reasonable at the time. The man stepped from between two parked cars and called something that slurred like a threat softened into a bargain. "Come on back, kid. I'll bring you to her." He sounded older than he looked in the streetlight, like he was carrying the weight of too many late nights. I ran. I booked it toward campus, like someone with a single task in their whole life, lungs burning and heart knocking. I lost him before I reached the dorm. I ducked through alleys and cut across a quad, the city a net closing behind me. When I finally burst into the private, safe-feeling clutter of campus buildings and light, I let my shoulders drop with a slow, trembling exhale of someone who just escaped. Only later, lying on my bed with the window cracked and the campus lights painting a grid on the curtains, I got the text that made my skin go cold, a message filled with venom, a screenshot of my location, and a short sentence that cut like a knife. "You're a little piece of. Lucky you got away. I would have strangled your ugly ass." The language was the same violent tone I'd seen in movies about predators and guys with too much time and too little conscience. I saved the screenshot. I blocked the number. My fingers shook as I typed a reply, promising to involve the police someday soon, though the word "someday" tasted cowardly. When you get that kind of message, the mind starts adding angles. I replayed the street, the car, the man's face. Too much model and too many small lies. I imagined what might have happened if I'd trusted the stranger, if curiosity had made me step into his vehicle on a quiet block. Sleep slid away. The dorm, which had been 4 walls and a bed 5 minutes before, felt porous like tissue. The next morning, daylight made everything flatter, and somehow worse. Campus suddenly felt full of people watching. every passerby a possible double of the man from the street. The police line in my head hummed. Report it. File it. Make a noise. I put on a hoodie, went downstairs to the campus security office, and asked how to file a complaint about a threatening text and a suspicious vehicle that had been tailing me. The officer behind the plexiglass was patient and efficient in that way officers are. She told me what to do, took my screenshots, and logged an incident report. She suggested I forward the threatening message to local law enforcement and warned me to keep my location sharing off. When she called it in, I felt both safer and exposed, like the whole thing had moved out of my chest and into a slow, bureaucratic machine. Still, the stitches in me didn't hold. For weeks I watched reflections in windows and took convoluted paths to class. I kept my phone in my front pocket and my headphones out so I could hear if someone was behind me. I told myself I was being careful, not paranoid. But paranoia and prudence are neighbors. You learn to tell them apart only by how long they live in your chest. Claire texted again, pleading and a little bewildered. Who was that? My dad would never. I had the screenshot of the text threatening me, and the detail of the man's voice in my head. I started to put the pieces together. An account with a profile picture that wasn't quite right. A man old enough to be a parent lying about kinship. A phone that sent violent messages. I messaged her from a new account and told her what had happened. She replied fast, her messages jittering with a mixture of embarrassment and concern. She'd never told her dad about pickup plans. She only used the app to find dates, and the account might be a catfish, someone pretending to be her or someone else, using her photos to build trust. Her confusion felt real. Her apology felt sincere. Still, I felt like the world had a new seam. In the weeks that followed, I took to small, practical rituals. I parked under a lighted lamp near the dorm when I came home late. I walked with groups when possible, and I recorded parking lot faces with my phone whenever I felt queasy. I also kept the screenshot ready to show officers, like a talisman that smoothed out the jagged edge of fear with evidence. There's comfort in a file number and the knowledge that someone else holds the paperwork. But the other part of the story, the human part, is less tidy. I slept with my door locked, of course, and stopped trusting small kindnesses from strangers. I felt guilty about it, in a soft, stupid way. Dating felt harder. When Claire messaged me months later, saying she'd broken up with the person she'd been seeing and had blocked a few weird accounts, I bristled and softened all at once. We swapped a few cautious, careful messages over the next semester, and even met for coffee once in a crowded cafe, where I noticed small things. How she cradled her cup, how she blinked when I mentioned the man. She looked genuinely sorry that someone had used her face to build a lie. I never caught him. The number was blocked. The account vanished into the ether of the web, where catfish and predators sleep. Campus security filed their report, and the police kept the screenshot on file. Those bureaucratic steps are not nothing. They are the rails society lays down when corners of civility are frayed. But they aren't guarantees. The real work, the slow unspooling of the knotted fear, happens in small acts, telling friends where I'm going, keeping safety apps installed, never leaving my location sharing on by default. The nights after the incident were the worst. Every rustle of leaves after class could be his car. Every thump in the stairwell could be a shadow making decisions about whether or not to follow. I learned to move as if I had already been followed. Quick steps, eyes scanning, keys in hand. It's an exhausting way to live, but it's survivable. Months passed, and the rawness dulled into a quieter vigilance. I started building a ledger of small rescues. Friends who walked me to my dorm after late labs, a campus escort who knew my name and waved when he saw me on evenings, an RA who'd check in if my door was shut too long. Those little interventions are cement against a certain kind of fear. They don't make you brave, they make you less alone. There were nights I wondered whether I'd overreacted, whether I had read a menacing story into a stranger's misstep. Then, in a follow-up email from campus security, I learned they had noticed a pattern of similar reports over the previous semester. Students who'd been approached at night by cars with tinted windows, accounts using other people's photos to lure dates, a cluster of messages sent from burner numbers that vanished after being read. My incident wasn't unique. It was part of a pattern that feeds on the small, lonely hours and the ways people open doors for the sake of connection. That pattern changes the way you let closeness begin. When I later sat across a table from Claire in that cafe, I found myself watching her hands, testing where her eyes met mine. We were both more careful. She told me she'd reported the fake account to the app and that she'd set stricter privacy settings, removed location sharing, and changed the way she wrote captions. Her face held a kind of remorse that made me feel both sad and oddly tender. We agreed to keep things slow. Dating after a scare becomes a lesson in boundaries. There are practical things I started doing that I recommend to anyone who asks. Don't share live location with someone you've just matched with. Meet in public, well-lit places the first few times. Tell a friend where you're going and when you expect to be back. Save screenshots. Don't feel embarrassed to involve campus security. Theirs is a job built for the small, crucial interventions that stop bigger things from forming. The tools are simple and cheap, and they help. They are not magic, but they are better than nothing. I brought the evidence to the local precinct eventually. The officer who took my report nodded and said the screenshot was useful. Sometimes the trail goes cold, but sometimes a number or a pattern is enough to connect a case. I left their office feeling less fragile, not fixed, not whole, but less alone. That matters. Sometimes I still catch my reflection in a dark window and flinch at the shape that watches back. Sometimes I start at the sound of a car idling outside my building, and my hands instinctively go for my keys. The city made me smaller for a while, but it also taught me how to arrange my life so that the small things, friends, procedures, a screenshot saved in the cloud, become a net. Fear still whispers sometimes, and I still sleep with my phone turned face up on the nightstand, but I no longer let it tell me where my next step should be. If there's one honest lesson in this, it's that the world will always have stranger corners. The only thing you can reasonably control is how loudly you call for help when you need it, and how carefully you keep your map. I kept my screenshot, I kept my story, and I learned slowly that staying alert was not cowardice. It was self-preservation.